You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 3, Kidnapping, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 10, A Biography in Plaid.
Welcome, everyone, to the Summer Palace.
After the wrestling match over rooms had concluded, the entire student body was assembled in the throne room for the sort of speech that should have included warnings about drinking too much beforehand. Agitated shuffling in the audience began before the speaker had traversed the distance from his seat to the dais.
I am, as I am sure many of you know or have guessed, Lord Albernactus Mordred, Duke of Guelph, Keeper of the Crowns, and Regent of Tiernanog, in the rightful ruler's long absence. In their stead, I welcome the youths of the whole of the Confederation on this auspicious centennial celebration of the founding of our great halls of learning on Avalon Island.
He spoke so ponderously that it wasn't clear if the pause after that introduction was meant to be the end of the speech, an anticipation of applause, or merely the time it took the aged man to draw a fresh breath. The speech droned on with individual greetings to every teacher, students with noble lineages, the 7 knights who were fighting as hard as the students to stay awake, and something he claimed was an amusing anecdote of his school days, but wandered more than the attention of his audience. Kuro had more trouble than most paying attention to his words because of what the regent was wearing. He was the sort of elderly mage who, tired of attempting to keep up with fashion, forsook it entirely. His beard looked to have started growing before any of the students were born, and wore pajamas and a housecoat. This sartorial neglect was disguised by crafting those loose-fitting sleepwear from a rainbow of fine silks and calling them robes, thereby making the man seem regal and wise rather than lazy. Also, he wore a fine but simple gold circlet, a symbol of his office, which was the source of Kuro's distraction. He had seen that circlet before. 2 of them, in fact. The one he had stolen, and the forgery he had swapped with it. It sat snugly on the old wizard's head, reminding Kuro of his crimes and filling him with doubt about why he had actually been allowed into the palace. Had the exchange ever been discovered? Was that man wearing a years-old fake? How much trouble would Kuro be in if he were found out? It would have been easier to stop fixating on the forged crown if he weren't terrified to look away. Just behind the regent, Sir Bors was staring daggers at Kuro, clenching and unclenching his prosthetic metal hand and chewing at the corner of his mustache. He seemed like a drunk brute loitering outside a pub, silently begging someone to give him cause to start a fight. In this case, Kuro was more than a stranger who had slighted him by claiming his preferred seat or dance partner. He was an enemy against whom he could take vengeance for his lost arm, comrades, and king. So while those around Kuro dozed, fidgeted, or drifted into whispered conversation, he stayed focused on the regent and the golden circlet on his head.
Tomorrow you shall all have a grand tour of the Summer Palace, led by one of the legendary Knights of the Sun.
The regent gestured to the 7 people arrayed behind him, who reacted with mixed enthusiasm at having been reduced to tour guides for teenagers.
As this is a school trip, we could not avoid including some educational components, but rest assured, there will be no test at the end.
The regent, not for the first time, chuckled at his own wit, despite not earning so much as a smirk from anyone else in the room.
In the evening, there shall be a grand feast befitting royal guests, and of course, a ball. This is Samhain, after all.
That did elicit a reaction. A wave of whispered delight and impatience swept over the hall. While it was impossible to see his full face behind the massive beard, the angle of his heavily hooded eyes seemed to indicate that the regent was smiling. Even so, he held up a finger to hush the crowd.
We can't have you attending a royal ball in school uniforms, and certainly not in jeans and T-shirts."
He said those last two words as if they were from a strange and foreign language, and laughed to himself again.
"And so we shall be fitting you all for proper formal attire this evening. Our gift to you."
That stunning conclusion was met with overwhelming applause and various less polite expressions of delight. What the regent failed to express in that announcement, though, was how slow that process would be. They had the entire school line up for the royal tailors from tallest to shortest, and wait while each was measured up. Kuro was last in line, though it was a matter of haircut whether he or Jose, the new firefly he had met on the ferry, had the distinction of being the shortest in school. He'd have wandered up the line to talk with his friends if it weren't for his constant companion, Sir McCool, keeping an eye on his movements. After an eternity in line, Kuro was admitted to the tailor's workshop. 3 exhausted women supported themselves against shelves of white linen shirts and racks of black jackets. Their uniform beige doublets were unbuttoned or abandoned, and one had given up on shoes. They regarded Kuro as an enemy come to deliver a merciful fatal blow, although Sir McCool's announcement that Kuro was the last in line breathed some measure of life back into the team. They hurried him onto a pedestal, and the 3 set about measuring every inch and angle of his person while they interrogated him. They moved as one and with startling speed. Long, nimble fingers stretched tape measures while others pinned and marked fabric, their work overlapping and intertwining but never obstructing. Their hands were so practiced that even the ever-swirling breeze around Kuro didn't slow them. Instead of fighting it, they let the breeze act as an extra set of hands, wrapping cloth and lifting tape measures. "Name?" asked the eldest of the trio, pale and white-haired. A tug-of-war between weariness and cosmetics made it hard to guess her age. Somewhere between McCutcheon and de rigueur, probably, but empires could rise and fall in that gap. "Kuro." "Family name," clarified the youngest as she pulled a pin from the bun she had bundled her fox-red hair into. "I don't have one," he responded, though he felt some sympathy for the embattled tailors, so he tried to provide more. "I'm sort of a foundling. The guard gave me the name Hayashi." The 3 tailors froze mid-measurement and traded startled glances. "We're not familiar with that surname." The middle in the group, black hair and dark skin contrasting sharply with the cream of her uniform, spoke slowly and began examining Kuro as a curiosity rather than the thing standing between her and a well-earned meal. "Where were you found?" "Detritus Lane." That sparked a chorus of murmurs, but not the tutting disapproval he was used to when people learned where he was from. It was more like they'd just sampled a tart and found an unfamiliar collection of spices. They looked to each other to decide whether they liked it or not, and when consensus couldn't be reached, sought an outside opinion. Looking to Sir McCool, who was letting the doorway keep him upright, he confirmed what Kuro had said with a shrug and a nod. "He's the winking weasel, if that helps any." "An unknown lineage," said the white-haired tailor with a hint of delight. "From unclaimed lands," added the redhead, as she abandoned her implements and gently clapped her hands. "Without liege or title," the black-haired woman continued, as if finishing the other's thought. Together they abandoned Kuro, still draped with cloth and riddled with pins, and strode with purpose to a massive loom on the far side of the workshop, which was dutifully producing piles of vibrant plaids. They shut it down and started making vigorous adjustments, their fingers crawling like spiders over knobs and slides, which shifted the colors of the many dozens of spools of thread feeding the machine, evoking clicks and creaks from mechanisms deep in the device. As they worked, they debated and argued, but never with enough words to make sense of, just incomplete thoughts followed by an adjustment to the loom. "Might I suggest?" A twist of a knob. "Perhaps a little more of?" A careful adjustment of a dial. "Oh no, but that's far too much." A pull of a lever. "What's going on?" asked Kuro, craning to see what was happening while the half-finished tailoring kept him stuck in place like a mannequin. "A new name," said the red, beaming. "A new land," continued the black, her long fingers rapidly tapping together. "A new tartan," concluded the white with a clap. When Kuro showed no sign of understanding, she took mercy. "As the royal sartorialists, we are responsible for weaving and recording all of the tartans. There's one for everyone. Each kingdom, clan, guild, family, and official post has a tartan.
And part of our job here is to determine which takes precedence for an individual. We've done that for each of your schoolmates."
Black took over while White returned to tuning the loom. It's rare that anyone does not have a tartan. Everyone comes from somewhere or has parents or at least a kingdom which claims them. It would seem that you do not. Red replaced her senior in the explanation, her energy overflowing, all exhaustion forgotten in the new task. "It's our job to create a new tartan when one is called for, but that almost never happens anymore. This is my first." The trio stood back to take a last look at the multitude of controls and together gave a satisfied nod, before White pulled a lever and the beast of a machine roared to life. They let the pattern repeat twice before shutting it down and shearing off a piece of the freshly minted cloth, then presented it proudly to Kuro. It was a crisscross of varied grays. At first glance, it was the plainest and clumsiest tartan he'd ever seen. The pattern lacked regularity and symmetry. The colors were flat and drab. The more he looked, though, the more it seemed to tell a story of the street he knew. The uneven stripes spoke of the cracked pavement and mismatched buildings. The hues of gray and black matched the concrete, exposed pipes, and shadowed alleys, the stripes of stray cats and the tails of curious raccoons. As he looked closer, he found that the pattern was not without color. Paired threads of gold and purple, blue and orange, the colors of the four kingdoms through which the lane ran, were woven in, thin and blending to gray against each other if not examined closely. There were occasional hints of moss green and brick red as well. It was almost like detritus and Kuro along with it had been ground up and poured into a piece of cloth. "What do you think?" asked the weavers in unison. He gazed at it and then the trio in amazement, struggling to find words. The strip of wool was a celebration of the place that had raised him, and it stated in the language of cloth that he and the lane were family. "It's wonderful," he said. "It's just like detritus. How did you do it?" White gave a sad smile Kuro had begun to recognize from those who had their own memories of Kuro's homeland. "I didn't always work in a palace, you know." They finished their measurements in a flurry, their weariness replaced with residual vigor from their creative outburst, and sent him away with the sample strip. "I can't believe they let me keep it," said Kuro, examining the cloth as he was walked down to his chambers by his nightly escort. Sir McCool scoffed. What were they going to do with a foot-wide piece of detritus tartan? It would have just gone in the trash. "I guess it's just nice to get something before it goes in the garbage," Kuro said as he folded the cloth neatly and placed it on a shelf in his bag. "Most of my things I had to dig out after." McCool stumbled in his response to that, so chose instead to change the subject. "Can I trust you not to try to sneak out of your room tonight?" "Sure," said Kuro. In an attempt to convince the knight he wasn't lying, he added, "If there was anything here I could steal safely, I would have done it years ago." The uncertain grumble from the knight indicated that he had not been comforted by that explanation, so Kuro continued, "Everything here is famous. You can't sell it, and it's all useless. What would I do with a painting of some dead guy or a fancy vase?" That succeeded in easing his concerns about Kuro leaving his room, but not about Kuro in general. They walked on in silence for a while as McCool selected his next question. "What about the raccoon?" Kuro winced. "You know about Autolycus?" "I've been within earshot of your friend Charlie all afternoon," explained the knight. "I know about a lot of things." Kuro groaned and coaxed his familiar out of his bag and held him up for McCool to examine. "He responds best to cheese and threats from people who aren't me." The knight regarded the troublesome familiar grimly. "Don't make me pop you," he said in a tone that implied the only reason he hadn't done it already was laziness. Arriving outside their rooms, McCool stretched and yawned, his body clearly wishing it were already asleep. "Sleep well, kid," he said. "You too," Kuro replied. Despite the well wishes of the young knight, Kuro did not sleep well. He was not a skilled sleeper to begin with. He was easily roused as a result of a young life spent expecting the guard to blast through the door and tear him to pieces at any moment. He had frequent nightmares, many because his beliefs about the guard had been proved largely correct. Being in a strange bed, in a room belonging to a family that had a vendetta against him, in a castle he had burgled, further failed to encourage a restful state. An equally restless raccoon didn't help at all. Autolycus tried every bed twice, finally deciding that the crib, which was perfectly sized for him, wasn't to his liking, and that the massive bed, of which Arthur occupied only a small portion, was unsuited to his raccooning whims. He settled at last on the child's bed, which was barely large enough for Kuro without an imaginary raccoon pretending to need rest. He couldn't even toss and turn properly, as there wasn't space. So, when a gentle but insistent knocking at his door demanded he abandon his efforts, he was in no mood for the manic grin that greeted him on the other side. "Let's go exploring!" Charlie whispered loudly enough to echo down the hall. Kuro attempted to close the door on her, but she was too quick and stepped inside. "Your room is great! Everyone else's is exactly the same, and they're nice and all, but they don't have the personality like this one. Hurry up and put on your shoes so we can go explore!" Kuro groaned. He should have guessed this was coming. Exploring used to be their favorite pastime, but Avalon was running out of new places to uncover. For Charlie, the palace was a fantastic new playground. "We're getting a full tour tomorrow," he argued and tried to push her out of the room. "Which is why," she contested as she used his efforts to force her into the hallway against him and pulled him along. "We have to explore tonight! After tomorrow it will be ruined!" He was tired and grouchy, and his compassion failed him. "I've already seen it. It's less interesting than the junior high, especially in the dark." It was crushing to see the wound that statement caused his friend. Her grin shattered and her face fell. "You went without me?" "Ages ago," Kuro defended, trying to patch the damage he dealt to his friend's feelings. "Before we even met." That had the intended effect of easing her hurt, but also hardened that sadness into resolve. "Then you can show me around!" Kuro tried another approach. "We can't even get out of the hallway. The doors are locked." "You can pick them," she said, with both pride in his talent and a renewed sense of adventure. "I didn't bring lockpicks." "That's okay." She held up a collection of hairpins and discarded cutlery, all bent and filed into various useful shapes. "I brought mine." Kuro regretted ever telling her about his burgling skills. Showing her how to make the tools had been a fun way to avoid homework, but was now threatening to get him into a lot of trouble. "Please, Charlie," Kuro begged. "I can't. I'll get arrested or worse. You remember what happened at the gates? They've got Sir McCool guarding me for the whole trip." Charlie sulked. "They won't let you have any fun, will they? What do they think you're gonna do? Steal the crown jewels and then bring them home on the bus?" Kuro laughed. Something like that." Having been defeated at every turn so far, she tried one last desperate gambit. "Do you think Arthur would want to come with me?" Kuro shook his head. "If he did, he wouldn't be pretending to sleep." Arthur let out a quiet grumble and hid himself further beneath the blankets. "Why don't you take Marie?" Kuro suggested. "She's always complaining that she doesn't get to go on our adventures." Charlie rolled her eyes. "I asked her first. She said we'd definitely get caught and then wouldn't be allowed to go to the dance." Kuro nodded along at the wisdom of Marie. She's right." Charlie scrunched her face and crossed her arms. "We might not get caught," she mumbled. "I think we already did," said Kuro and pointed to the doorway across the hall, which now contained a Knight of the Sun, clad in blue striped pajamas, with his copper hair mussed and uneven from a fitful sleep, scowling at the troublesome youth. Releasing a sigh of defeat, Charlie deflated and sank to the floor like a marionette cut from its strings, a pile of limbs and lament. "Are we in trouble?" "We? I see only one student out of the rooms looking for mischief," replied Sir McCool with a wry grin. It was the sort of dark humor that was evoked by being woken by teenagers in the wee hours of the morning. He let Charlie stew in her regret for a while before his desire to be back in bed overwhelmed his malice. "Go on then." Charlie clambered back to her feet and slunk down the hallway. "One moment." McCool halted her progress. "Could I borrow your lockpicks for a couple of days, Ms. Cook?" Charlie groaned at having her aspirations for adventure so soundly defeated. She dug out the collection of repurposed scrap metal and handed it to the young knight. "I bet the noble kids get to explore." Kuro disagreed. "The royal guest chambers are so big, they could spend the whole night just exploring their rooms. Besides, they're probably too busy eating caviar and getting foot massages to think of leaving. McCool snorted back a laugh. Get to bed, he said, trying to assert some measure of authority. After Charlie was well down the hall, the knight turned an accusing eye to Kuro. You've seen the castle before, have you? Kuro presented him with the most innocent smile he could muster, which he doubted would have fooled a toddler. Nonetheless, McCool didn't seem interested in a late-night interrogation. Took the tour, I assume? When met only with silence and the embarrassing attempt at a guiltless grin, he said, Good night, Kuro. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.